It was a Sunday, Palm Sunday to be exact. The kind of morning that made people in the Oklahoma Panhandle feel, for just one brief moment, that maybe God hadn't forgotten them after all. The sky was clear, the air was still, the temperature hit 80 degrees before noon. After 4 years of drought, after 4 years of dust choking the fields, killing the cattle, filling the lungs of children with something doctors would later call dust pneumonia, people went outside. In Guymon, Oklahoma, families packed into the Methodist church for a special prayer service. The minister stood at the pulpit and said, "Good rains within 3 weeks means a harvest. God rules all, and our last resort is prayer." The congregation prayed. They walked out of church into the warm spring air. And somewhere to the north, in the Dakotas, a cold front dropped out of Canada. And what happened next would be witnessed by 500,000 people. And none of them would ever forget it. This is the story of April 14th, 1935, the day known as Black Sunday, the single worst natural disaster in American agricultural history, and the day that sent 3.5 million people walking away from everything they had ever owned. But before we get there, we need to go back. Because what happened on Black Sunday didn't begin on April 14th. It began 20 years earlier with a plow. The Great Plains of America had always been grassland. Thousands of miles of native grass, roots growing 6 feet deep into the earth, holding the soil in place through droughts that had killed civilizations before recorded history. Native Americans who lived here for centuries understood this. The grass was the continent's anchor. Then the tractors came. After World War I, wheat prices soared. The government needed grain. The American West needed to produce. And in the 1920s, farmers across Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, Colorado, and New Mexico did something the land had never been asked to survive before. They ripped up the grass, all of it. With the new gasoline tractors, machines powerful enough to tear through root systems that had been growing since before the Roman Empire. Between 1925 and 1930, over 33 million acres of native grassland were plowed under on the southern plains. 16 million of those acres were in the Texas and Oklahoma panhandles alone. And for a few years, it worked. The wheat grew. The money came. One Texas farmer photographed by Dorothea Lange later recalled, 1927 made $7,000. He was rich by the standards of that era. Then, 1932, hit the road. 5 words, an entire life. The rain stopped in 1931. Not suddenly, it just didn't come. 1 season, then 2, then 3. The wheat died, the roots were gone. There was nothing left to hold the dirt down, and the wind that had always blown across the Great Plains, picked up the top layer of the continent itself and started moving it. By 1934, dust storms, called black blizzards, were sweeping across a territory the size of Pennsylvania, regularly darkening the sky from North Dakota to Texas. Every storm buried farmhouses up to the windowsills. Every storm killed livestock. Every storm sent more families to the hospital with dust pneumonia, lungs filling with fine silt until breathing became impossible. And through all of it, most families stayed, because this was their land. Their grandfather had broken this earth. Their father had built this house. You don't walk away from that. You tape the windows shut. You stuff wet rags in the door cracks. You pray, and you wait for rain that never comes. In the Oklahoma Panhandle, the morning of April 14th felt different. The air was genuinely still. No dust, no gray haze on the horizon, just blue sky and warmth. Marietta Foreman was a child that day. She was riding in a car with her parents through the Oklahoma Panhandle, the narrow strip of land in the far northwest corner of the state, the absolute heart of the Dust Bowl. Later, in an interview recorded in 2001 for Oklahoma State University's oral history program, she remembered the morning. It was just so still. By noon, people across the region noticed something on the northern horizon. A thin, gray-blue line of haze, low to the ground. Most ignored it. The haze had been there before. But by 2 in the afternoon, that line had grown, and kept growing. Marietta Foreman, still in her parents' car, looked north. You could see this coming, but there was no wind, she remembered. Then she saw the birds. There were just thousands of them coming, just coming and coming and coming. Birds streaming south, rabbits streaming south. Every living creature that could move was running in the same direction. And still no wind. At approximately 3 p.m., the leading edge of the cold front reached the southern high plains. What it was carrying was not what anyone had seen before. Pauline Gray, who witnessed the storm that day, later described it. It had the appearance of a mammoth waterfall in reverse. The apex of the cloud was plumed and curling, seething and tumbling, and whipping trash, papers, sticks, and cardboard cartons before it. The wall of dust was 500 to 600 feet tall, 800 miles wide, moving at 60 miles per hour, and the temperature, which had been 80 degrees that morning, was already dropping. In a matter of hours, it would fall 50 degrees. Marietta Foreman's family stopped their car on the road. Someone walking alongside the road, a boy, alone, trailing a wagon with 2 cows. They picked him up. And then the wall arrived. Total darkness. Not like night. Night has gradations. You can adjust to night. This was nothing. 13-year-old Harley Holiday of Dodge City, Kansas, had run outside to bring in his family's laundry before the storm hit. The cloud hit me outside with a load of clothes, he later remembered. I couldn't see anything at all. Static electricity generated by the billions of dust particles crackling against each other was so powerful that it shorted out car engines. Vehicles stopped dead on the road. Families locked inside, sealed in darkness, some of them convinced, genuinely convinced, that it was the Last Judgment, that God had answered the prayers of Guyman's Methodist congregation, not with rain, but with the end. When the storm finally passed, the total darkness lasting 40 minutes in some places, followed by 3 hours of partial darkness, people stepped outside into a changed world. The sun reappeared, but witnesses said it had a violet-green hue, like a bruise on the sky. And the dust was everywhere, drifted up against houses like snow, filling the seats of cars that had been parked outside, burying fences, covering livestock that hadn't made it to shelter. More than 350 houses across the region had to be torn down after that single storm. They were too damaged to save. Millions of acres of newly planted wheat, the wheat that represented the entire income for tens of thousands of families, gone. Rabbits lay dead on the roads. Birds lay dead in fields. 20 people in Kansas alone died from dust pneumonia and suffocation. And the topsoil that farmers had spent decades trying to coax crops from, 300 million tons of it had left the Great Plains on that single day. 300 million tons. Gone. An Associated Press reporter named Robert Geiger had been sent out to the dust sector on assignment. He and his photographer, Harry Eisenhard, were caught in the storm 6 miles north of Boise City, Oklahoma. They waited inside their vehicle for 2 hours. When the darkness finally lifted enough to drive, they made their way back to town, and Geiger sat down and wrote a dispatch. His editor in Kansas City, a man named Edward Stanley, was rewriting the story. And somewhere in the process of turning Geiger's field notes into clean copy, Edward Stanley wrote 2 words: Dust Bowl. The next day, those 2 words appeared in newspapers across the country, and for the first time, the catastrophe that had been building for 5 years had a name that came from a reporter trapped in a car in the dark in Oklahoma. Now here is the question that had been building for months in every farm household across the Southern Plains. When do you leave? How much do you lose before you walk away? That question, I'm going to leave it there, because that is where the real story begins. Not the dust storm, not the drought, but the moment a person stands in the middle of everything they have ever built and starts doing the math on whether it's worth staying. This is part 1. Part 2 follows those loaded jalopies onto Route 66, west toward California, toward a promise that nobody had told them was already broken. If you want to be there when it drops, subscribe and turn on notifications. And if this story stopped you, if something here felt worth knowing, share it with someone who would care. History this specific doesn't spread on its own. We'll see you in part 2.